We have a special treat for all of you guys tonight. We have Mr. Fuller. He is going to be giving the lesson to you guys tonight. For those of you that don't know Mr. Fuller, he is one of the elders at Laurel Church of Christ, and he is one of the elders over the CSC as a whole. And so he has a ton of wisdom and a ton of knowledge, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy the talk that he has prepared for you tonight. I know that he has been working on it for a while, and it's going to be great. I looked over the slides, and I'm really excited about it. And so if you haven't had a chance to meet him, be sure to meet him afterwards. Him and his wife and his family have really just welcomed Megan and I since we've been here, and our experience here wouldn't have been the same without them. And so everyone give a big warm welcome to Mr. Fuller.
Hey, Jason. Good to see you. Thanks for inviting me. This is an important topic we're talking about tonight. But before we get into that, Arden, congratulations. What a great decision. Josh, I hope to be there tomorrow night. Congratulations. When I first came to UT, I studied architecture and did architecture for many years. And while I was in the middle of that, I decided that, you know, it's important to provide good environments for people to live in and to work in and to worship in and all these other things. But there was something about that that wasn't totally satisfying from the standpoint of, is it really helping people at the core? And so I went back to school, kept an architecture firm going, went back to school, got a master's degree in mental health counseling, got licensed in counseling. Now I'm kind of retired from the architecture world, but I'm still doing some part-time counseling work. So that's why when Jason asked me to talk about this, I mean, I jumped on it immediately because I have a lot of colleagues and a lot of people that I supervise in their clinical work. Most of them are inundated with college students in their counseling offices. And it's not really an exaggeration to say that there's an epidemic of mental health issues among college students. I'm not trying to be alarming or to scare you or anything, but there's a lot going on. We're going to talk about, and we'll talk about some of that tonight. This is my phone number. If you'd like to text me a question anytime during the evening, feel free to do that. It won't buzz out loud. And then at the end, if we have any questions, I'll try to address those too. But I've tried to anticipate what might be on your mind when it comes to mental health. And these are the questions I will try to answer before we get to the end. But if I'm missing something, be sure and let me know. Or if you'd like clarification, either at the end of the presentation or during the presentation, just raise your hand. I want this to be as interactive if you like. But these are the questions we're going to be looking at. Why are we even talking about this? I've alluded to some of that before. If it's such a big deal, then what are most college students dealing with from a mental health standpoint? How do I know when I need help, right? What happens in counseling? What are those themes that keep coming up in the lives of college students that need to be addressed? And one thing we're finding out is many college students are reluctant to ask for help. We're going to talk about that. And then many of you have asked, well, how can I help my friend? She's going through such a hard time. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I'm going to hit that. And then I'm going to give you some ideas about where you can go to get some of that help that you might need. Why is mental health important? Why are we talking about it? Mental health is just one of 4 major components of total health, the way I look at things. When I'm doing assessments with clients, I'm not just looking at their emotional health, mental health issues, but I also want to know about their nutrition and about their exercise and about the kind of relationships they have going on, and about their faith and what's going on with them spiritually. And also want to know, also certainly want to know what's going on from an emotional standpoint. But the point is, if one of these is broken, all 4 are going to suffer. And you can think about these as wheels on a car. If you have four tires that are fully inflated and perfectly round, and in good condition, all the treads are great, you're going to get a really good ride, aren't you? It's going to be as smooth as it can get.
Whose number is that on the lower right-hand screen?
That's my number. If you have a question during this presentation, just send me a text and I'll try to address that. So think about 4 wheels on a car. If one of those tires is flat or out of round, it affects the whole ride, doesn't it? And that's the point with this illustration here, is that anything that affects one component of your total health will affect all the other components. So if you're spiritually unhealthy, it's going to affect your relationships, and it's going to affect your mental, emotional health, and it's going to affect your physical health. And if any of these is out of round, that's where we need to start paying attention. In Luke, there's this story about Jesus when he was 12 years old. He's at the temple, and people are amazed at his knowledge and everything. And so Luke tells that and ends that story. And then there's this verse, and then he goes into a point of Jesus' life when he's like 30 years old, when he's starting his ministry. And the Bible tells us almost nothing about Jesus between 12 and about 30, except this verse. And Luke, who is a doctor, by the way, says, and Jesus grew in wisdom, stature, and in favor with God and man. And when you look at that and break it down, he's really looking at the 4 major wheels of health that we're talking about. He grew in wisdom, in other words, his mental, emotional health. He grew in stature, which is our physical being. He grew in favor with God, which is his spiritual side. And then he grew in favor with man, which is the relational side. So this one verse here, talking about how Jesus grew up and matured as a young man, about the same age as you are, this is what he did. This is what was going on in his personal world. All right, another answer to the question, why are we talking about mental health? Look at these statistics. This is from 2020, so it's pretty fresh information. Any of those stand out as a real surprise to you? You know, the only one that doesn't surprise me is the second one. This whole thing about feeling overwhelmed. Everybody's felt overwhelmed, right? That's part of the college experience. That's the only one that's, well, that's not a big surprise. Some of these others are pretty strong, I guess, pretty mind-boggling. The fact that almost 2/3 of college students feel lonely, over 2/3 feel sad, very sad. Hopelessness in over half college students surveyed in 2020. This is why it's important to talk about mental health. There's a lot of stuff out there in your world and among your friends that's going on that is hurting in many ways. Alex?
So I'm just doing some numbers down with the considered suicide stuff. If you add that up, that equals to about what, 15, 20, a little over 20%. So if you take 20% of 30,000 students, how much is that? So did they pull the UT's campus, or was it just like all around the US?
No, this is not UT. It is a college student survey in the country.
Oh, in the country?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I'm sure UT is not much different from these statistics. And then this final thing here, 67% of college students experiencing anxiety and depression are not getting help. So there's another reason that we're talking about it. We're trying to make it okay to get help if there's things going on. One of the natural things to ask is, well, why? Why is there so much distress emotionally and mentally in college students right now? I just came up with a list of several things here that might have something to do with that. Part of it is your developmental stage. You're going through more changes in your life now, maybe than any other point in your life. This whole thing of separating from home, moving to a place where you might not know many people, taking on a much larger workload, trying to navigate friendships and relationships. The academic pressure is so much higher than it is in high school. There's the input of social media. Some of you are forming new romantic relationships for the first time, or actually developing those relationships into something that might be permanent. Most people start to question and reconsider their faith and the things they believe. I certainly went through that. And thankfully, the CSC and Laurel Church for me were places I could ask those tough questions and it'd be safe and it'd be okay to challenge my own faith. And of course, the abuse of alcohol, drugs, sex, stress, everything. And then if this is all not enough, we added a layer of COVID for the past year. So would you add anything to this list? Okay, we'll be coming back to this kind of thing in a minute. One of the questions is, what's going on? What are the most common issues the college students are dealing with? And here it is statistically. Anxiety has become number one as the biggest incident of mental distress, followed by depression. It used to be the other way around, but anxiety has creeped up above depression now. Relationship issues comes in third. That could be anything from roommates to boyfriend, girlfriend, to teachers or whatever. Suicide ideation. That means not necessarily suicide attempts, but just people thinking, I wonder what it'd be like to be dead. I wonder if I just didn't wake up tomorrow. Or just an unnatural association and obsession maybe with death and dying. Self-injury is big on college campuses, and this is typically in the form of cutting or burning. Alcohol abuse, of course, I would have guessed this number might be a little higher. I think alcohol is abused by more than 9.5 people. But maybe this is to the point where it's interfering with life, relationships, work, and everything else. And then, of course, eating disorders, higher in women, but still one of the top 7 issues on college campuses. So a lot going on, isn't there? But look at these percentages. Over almost just barely over half college students are experiencing some level of anxiety to the point that it's interrupting their lives and interrupting what they're trying to accomplish. Over a third people with depression. That's pretty serious. And this is significant too. The brain, I said earlier, the brain is developing during this period of time. Your brain is not totally finished development until about age 26. So you're in that you're going down the home stretch here for brain development. And during that time, things happen. A lot of mental illness and a lot of mental issues show up in that early adulthood period. And so you may have been coasting along for 20 years, just doing great. And all of a sudden, you're so sad you can hardly get up in the morning. Or you're getting ready to go into a class, and all of a sudden your heart's beating out of your chest, and you wonder what in the world is going on. I've been okay. And it's because a lot of these things happen in that early adulthood period. 25% have a diagnosable mental illness, mental health condition. A lot of words going around here about, we're talking about mental health, mental issue, mental distress, but we're just talking about things related to the brain, basically. So 25% have a diagnosable. That means they meet the criteria for a medical diagnosis of depression or anxiety or something else. And that's overall. If you look at just the freshman class, 1/3 of freshmen have some kind of mental distress. And 1/3 of incoming freshmen are taking psychotropic drugs already. And those are just drugs that relate to depression and anxiety and ADHD and anything, again, that treats the brain to help cope and compensate for the issues related to depression and anxiety primarily. Okay. I know this is like a fire hose spraying on me. I've got a lot of material, but we'll have time to slow down in a minute. So the other question, how do you know when it's time to get help? Well, I think a really good indicator is to go back to your 4 wheels here of health and just say, how am I doing? And if you see some real deficits in any of these areas, not just this, but if you see some, if you're just not taking care of yourself physically, you know, you're not resting well, you're lethargic, not eating well, that could be a sign of depression, you know. So look at all the other wheels of your health picture here and just say, how am I doing? Because again, they're all interrelated. And the big question, well, again, is how do I know when to get help? I've taken the 2 top conditions here that are on campuses now, anxiety and depression, and just giving you some things to do self-reflection on to see, oh, that sounds kind of like me. Now, this is not to diagnose anybody, okay? We would do a much more thorough interview assessment process before making any diagnosis. But these are things that kind of point in that direction. And everybody in here in this room could probably say, yes, I've done that. Yes, I've had that. Yes. So 1 or 2 things is not going to be an automatic diagnosis. But just look this over, and if you're finding that, well, there's a whole cluster of things there I'm struggling with, well, let's talk about that. Just see what's going on. A few more questions to ask yourself. You guys even see back there in the back row? Okay, great. So we're on to anxiety now. These are the major types of anxiety that they could have. Generalized anxiety disorder is just a persistent sense of worry and dread. It's almost like this worry follows you around everywhere you go, affects almost everything you do. It's just constantly being afraid or fearful of the future or suspecting something bad is going to happen. It's just really kind of a gloom and doom outlook. Obsessive compulsive disorder, that's a particular type that typically is characterized by intrusive thoughts that just will not go away. And they can be the craziest thoughts. Be things like, I'm gonna hit this guy when I see him, you know, or well, but it's intrusive, persistent thoughts that are obsessive to the point that you just can't stop them, and they're interfering with your life. It's often accompanied by compulsive behaviors. Those are behaviors that people with this disorder use to try to dissipate that emotional energy. For some people, it's checking light switches to make sure it's turned off, or it's you're tapping your car 20 times before you get in to make sure you're going to be safe. It's these rituals that are performed to bring down the anxiety level. Post-traumatic stress, you know what that is. That often follows a very strong traumatic event in people. And later, something might trigger the exact emotions they felt during that event. This is very common in soldiers who have maybe been in war and in gunfights, and then they're walking down the strip and a car backfires, and they immediately spill everything they felt when the machine guns were firing in the war. It's also characterized by a really hypervigilance of what's going on around me, and to the fact that you cannot relax, always looking for the next bad thing to happen. Panic disorder, characterized primarily by panic attacks. That feeling of I'm going to die. It feels like a heart attack coming on. The whole body gets ramped up, heartbeat goes up, and the breathing can get labored. And it's very, very frightening. But it's a very common feature of an anxiety disorder. Thankfully, nobody's ever died of a panic attack, so it is strictly a brain misfiring, too much adrenaline, chemically oriented thing. And then social anxiety disorder is just that fear of looking stupid or being seen as inferior or being judged. And it can be crippling to the point that people don't interact socially because of that deep-seated fear. All right. Okay, depression is the second highest cause of emotional distress in college students. So take a look at these questions, and these are kind of things that might ring true for somebody with depression. This question is here because if there's depression in your family, then your chances of having it are higher than if not. And that's true of some other mental disorders too. So you may be thinking that, well, everybody gets sad, or yeah, sure. I mean, I've lost interest in things before. So you can look at depression and anxiety on a continuum. And then, for example, in depression, on this end, there might be sadness over a failed grade or a lost friendship or death of a family member. And that's kind of normal, right? Everybody experiences that kind of sadness or grief. But then on the other end of this spectrum, for depressed people with depression, is practically the inability to live. They cannot get out of bed, they cannot take a shower, cannot wash a dish, they cannot interact with a friend, it's pulling away in total isolation. So in depression and in anxiety, you're going to have a real broad continuum here of severity. So at what point on that line then is it time to get help? You can get help anytime along that line. You know, even if you think it's not a big deal, if it's bothering you, then it's time to maybe get some help. Did I go the wrong way? Yeah, what happens in counseling? I'm obviously a big proponent of counseling. So what happens if you've never done this before? Well, the main thing to remember is that it is for you. It is your agenda, your goals, your needs that are of utmost importance in the room. Not the counselors, not your mom and dad's, but you. In counseling, you have complete confidentiality. The counselor will not talk to anybody, including your parents, about what's going on in your life, unless there are some exceptions by law. That is, if they think you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else, or you talk to them about child abuse that you know of that's ongoing, or elder abuse. In other words, if anybody's being harmed and you make that known, they have to say something about that. But anything you tell them about your life and about your past, and about what's going on, that is totally confidential. In counseling, you will not be judged. No matter how bad it feels for you, or how bad you think it is to be in your predicament, or how guilty you feel about whatever, your counselor will not judge you for that. That person is there as a person of safety and where you can be totally honest. And that's not true in a lot of settings, is it? Where you can be totally honest. Counselor will explore your values. What are your goals? You know, what are we trying to accomplish here? What do you need from me? What do you need as we make progress here? And if we're successful, how is your life going to be better as a result of counseling? So what we do has to do with thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. And we're going to look at those and see if these aren't working too well for you. You know, maybe your thought processes aren't really realistic or rational. So let's challenge those thought processes. or some of these coping behaviors you have is really not serving you well. So let's look at some of those things and try some alternatives that might give you better results. If necessary, we're going to talk about your family and your past, because most of what you know and who you are is a result of the family you grew up in. So there may be some really relevant information there. And it's not the point is not to point blame or to say, well, this is all mom's fault because she raised you like this. That's not helpful. Okay. And then one thing I didn't put up here is that the counselor may refer you to a medical professional for medications. Okay, some of the major themes. One thing we see a lot is students having a hard time in this transition between total dependence on mom and dad and then living independently and living autonomously without their immediate influence. Some handle that really well because their parents have prepared them really well with responsibility and encouragement and support. Some have not done so well with this transition, and so getting to college, they realize that they're not ready to live this life by themselves. So we'll work a lot with that differentiation, is differentiating who you are from who your parents are and who you were at home. Better coping skills, I mentioned that. We might look at your history, family history related to anxiety and depression. A lot of college age counseling to college students has to do with relationships. As we talked about earlier, this is a time of kind of upheaval in relationships. You're forming new ones, you're meeting new people, you're meeting people really different from you, and there are all kinds of challenges with values and beliefs. Whole health habits, substance abuse, sexuality. Yeah, sexuality is another big theme in counseling. How your sexuality is being practiced, if it is. Issues around gender identification, pornography, which is another kind of almost pandemic among young people and older people, and of course promiscuity and all the issues that go along with that. For all of that, from risk and guilt and conflict. Treating past or current trauma. That's we're seeing a lot of that too among college students. And I call big T and little t trauma. Big T trauma would be something, a really major traumatic event, maybe a horrific car wreck, or you witness somebody dying, or sexual abuse, or physical abuse. Those are big T traumas that can affect the rest of your life. So that those have to be processed. Little T traumas would be things like, let's just say you just were frequently neglected as a young person. You know, nothing big ever happened, but just a pattern of neglect over time. Pattern of disappointments or losses. Anything that happens that's traumatic in that sense, but not the big T kind of thing. We don't want to underestimate or we don't want to understate the importance of little T trauma. But again, it affects everything you are, everybody, every part of your being. Some people struggle with career choices. UTK is a really good career office. I would just send you there for that. And they will help you with that process of assessment and career choosing and seeing what's out there and seeing what you're best suited for. Again, this whole thing about inherited spiritual beliefs, this is the time when most of us start questioning that and ask that question, do I really believe what my home church is saying about this? Or do I really believe what mom and dad told me about that? Because those will be challenged on a college campus. So a counselor can help, especially a spiritual counselor can help walk you through that process. Sometimes people just have horrible habits and time management skills, and some of it's just very kind of nuts and bolts. Okay, here's how to manage your calendar, and here's when to get up, and just practice some skills on being a better manager of your time. And then everybody has certain losses or griefs whether it's deaths or sicknesses or estranged family members or girlfriends, boyfriends lost. I mean, there are losses that happen all through life, but some of those are pretty acute during college times. And then some people just have a tough time adjusting from one setting to another. And so adjustment disorders are fairly common in college students. And adjusting in itself is not a bad thing, but if you get stuck in it and just can't seem to make progress beyond where you are, another common thing people say is, I just feel stuck. Just feel stuck. I can't move on. Well, that would be kind of an adjustment disorder. And a counselor can help you unstick and looking at those things that are holding you back, those things that might be hurdles. I guess a lot of reasons students may not get help, and I've tried to imagine what some of those would be. And that first one there, I think is pretty big, is that we associate mental distress or mental illness with crazy, with psychotic or something. And of course, it's nothing further from the truth. Now, but the thing about the brain up here, just to talk about that for a minute too. Every other organ in your body, if it were not functioning at 100%, you probably wouldn't hesitate to take a medicine for that organ, would you? You've got high blood pressure, you're not going to say, no, I'm not taking medicine, that's just weak, or I've got an underactive thyroid, I can say, well, what a wimp, you can't overcome that and man up and deal with it, but I'll take medicine so that my thyroid will work the way it's designed to work. You could do that about any organ in your body. The body is just a collection of organs that have specialized functions. And with any other organ of the body, we don't hesitate to throw medicine at it if that's what it takes to help it function better, right? Well, the brain is just another organ. The brain does not always work the way it's designed to. It doesn't always work at 100% capacity. And so there are medications that we know interact with neurotransmitters so that the brain actually functions more efficiently and more completely than without those medications. So I know there's a huge resistance to medications among some people. But if you can just remember that the brain is just another organ like all the others, sometimes it needs help. And that's what the medications do. 50% of the college students said that people will think less of me if I go into counseling or if I admit to having a mental disorder. That's pretty big. How many of you would think less of your friend if you found out she was being treated for depression? Nobody, really. It's all in our imagination. This whole sense of, oh, what will people think is way too strong in that decision. For some people, having a mental distress or mental issue means they're weak. And if they're just a stronger person, would be dealing with this. So I even think that, and this one really grabs me here, is linking emotional problems with degree of faith. And thinking that, well, if I were just still closer to God, this would not be a problem. If I were a more spiritual person, I'd be able to cope with this depression or anxiety. I think nothing could be further from the truth. Okay, I tried it before and it didn't help. I'm sure that's happened. Picking a counselor is an important decision and an important choice because that relationship is going to be the most important thing in the room. Not their degrees and not their specialties, and not their years in practice. The relationship that your counselor develops with you will be the most important thing in your recovery. And so sometimes it's just not a good fit. And you may think about that like a college professor, like somebody recommends this professor to you, you sign up for the class, they say, oh, he's great. You sign up for the class and you think, I hate this guy. I can't stand this class. I can't wait to get out of here. So that personal relationship again does not always hit the first time. So keep looking. It's always, you can't always fire your professor, but you can always fire your counselor. You say, I'm going to look somewhere else for a better fit and move on. If it didn't help before, it could be you just weren't ready. Maybe do something your parents pushed you into, or thought you needed and forced you on to go, but you weren't ready to go through the process, and that happens. So maybe later, it's a better time. I talked about the medication thing. Some people just don't like going back to the past because it's really painful. I don't like the way I feel afterward. It can be hard. When you go to a medical doctor and they cut you open and work on your heart or your liver or your belly, it's going to hurt. You know, it's going to be really uncomfortable. In a similar way, when you go looking into the brain and into our behaviors and thoughts, sometimes it hurts to see what we see, but healing takes place beyond that. I don't know where to go for help. And so that probably does paralyze some people, just not knowing what are the resources out there, what can we do, where can we go, what do we have that we can look to get this taken care of. And then of course there's a financial piece. How am I going to pay for this? Counseling is expensive. Okay, now the question, how do I help my friends? I've just got some pointers here about what to do and don't do. First of all, just empathize with them. Acknowledge that they're going through a really hard time. Tell them you're sorry, tell them I wish I could do something, but don't try to fix it for them. It's not helpful to say, well, you just need to work a little harder, or if you just went to bed earlier, you'd be fine, or just make a schedule, everything will work out. They don't need you to fix them. They just need you to walk with them through this. Yeah, eat better, sleep more, exercise more. This sounds like parents talking to me, but or just dismiss it. Just quit thinking about that. That's silly. You don't need to think about that. Just think about something pleasant. None of that's helpful. So, okay. So the best thing you can do is say, I'm so sorry. What can I do to help you? What do you need from me right now? Just be available. All right, some of your options here are UT Counseling Center, which you're already paying for that. It's included in your tuition. I understand there might be a waiting list. So if you feel like you can wait for a while, there may be an option there for you to get counseling right here on campus for free.
I was going to say, actually, Charlotte Whitmer personally, she's great for counseling.
Okay.
At the Helen Ross McNabb Center.
Yes.
Yeah, she's great.
Okay, good. At Laurel, there are two of us who are doing some counseling there. Charlotte Whitmer, who Alan just mentioned, is a licensed professional counselor.
She's awesome.
She's not a Laurel member because it's a violation of our ethics codes to counsel your own congregants, I guess. So she's not a Laurel member, but she sees a lot of Laurel people. And the way we work that out is that the people pay based on their ability to pay. In other words, if you have a good income, you may pay the entire $50 or $60 fee. If you're struggling, you may pay $10, and then the Laurel Church will pay the rest. So we've always had that arrangement. Well, not always, but for the last 5 or 6 years, got that arrangement for Laurel members. Just now, I guess, considering what can we do for college students as an extension of Laurel ministry. Then there are also just independent group and group counseling centers. Typically, most of you are probably on your parents' health insurance right now. And almost all health insurances have a behavioral, what they call the mental health side is a behavioral health component. And so you just pay a typical copay like you would if you go to your doctor. And then your insurance will pick up the rest. Those copays vary a lot depending on the insurance company. So if this is something you want to do and you can talk to your parents about it, you can get the details, exact details about your policy from your parents. If you don't want to go that route, then let's just talk and I'll help you find somebody. And there are also then, in addition to just general counseling centers, there are Christian counseling agencies, and they're unique in that they intentionally use prayer and scripture in the counseling process. And same thing, they take insurance or you can do private pay. But you can see there's a pretty broad range of cost of expense here in getting counseling. Still not sure. If you have any questions at all about this, about the process, about what I've talked about, I'll be happy to sit down with any of you for free and just help you maybe make a plan for moving forward. Okay. So if you have any questions? Can we talk about the effects of mental health on the spiritual aspect of one's life? Sure. Going back to our 4 wheels, remember that image? If you are, say you have depression. Based on what we said here, what does depression look like? It's this pervasive sadness. It's a lack of motivation. It's a feelings of hopelessness. It's really questioning your self-worth and the value that you bring. What kind of witness can you be if you don't like yourself, you don't like life, and you're flat mentally, and you have no motivation? All of those things roll over into our spiritual life and making prayer desperate or non-existent. And if you're not motivated to study chemistry, you're not going to study your Bible because it affects everything. If you're depressed, the tendency is to isolate from people, not to engage with people. And a lot of Christianity is that community and that engagement with other people. Anything else? I think that's just one example of how it can affect some spiritual things. What's about living with an Asperger's, since it's been recently diagnosed? Asperger's. Okay. You ever heard of Asperger's syndrome? Are you familiar with that? There's a chapter in the DSM that describes it's like an autism spectrum, and it's one of those continual things. Like on one end, you've got this really slight symptomology that may have to do with difficulty reading social cues or just missing certain points or abstract points. And on the other end of this spectrum is full-blown autism, which may be almost a complete break with the world, with reality. So there's all things in between. Asperger's is down on this. Okay. Most people with Asperger's are very high functional, very smart, but may have some deficiencies in things like social cues and abstract thoughts and things like that. It's really pretty. Anything else? I think for the first time I can say I spoke to a full room at the CSC. Go from one end to the other.
I think Kinsey is.
Yeah, Kinsey.
I see, talked about having 4 wheels.
would improving one bill help improve the others?
Yeah. Yeah. And just think about that, going back to our example of depression. If you improve that depression, then you're more engaged with people, which addresses fellowship from a spiritual standpoint and your relationships with everybody around you. It improves your physical health because when you move out of depression, you're moving more, you're sleeping better, and you're eating better. So that's just one example of how that one piece there automatically improves all the others just by dealing with that.
So I'm guessing it can also work in reverse. Like if I improve my physical health, I can also improve my relationship and my emotional, my spirit.
Yeah, because one aspect of physical health is just feeling better about who you are. Yeah. And yeah. So that's why I'm saying that's why that piece is so important. They're also interrelated. Any effect on one affects all the others, whether it's a positive effect or a negative effect. Jason, that's all I have.
All right. Well, everyone, let's give Mr. Fuller a big round of applause. Tidbit, I know we're over time, so I'll be real quick, but I actually went to counseling after I graduated from college. I think it was a year or two after, and I saw a counselor for probably a year, and he helped me work through a lot of issues in my life stemming from my adoption and being adopted. And so sorry, I'm getting text messages from my wife. I think she's here to pick me up. Our car's in the shop, so we're not in the car. But yeah, I worked at the counselor really helped me work through a lot of issues that were underlying issues that were going on in my life, and helped me just with my overall health and outlook on life and so forth. And so if you're on the fence about it, if you think that it's something you might need, don't be afraid to reach out. I know from personal experience that it helped me a lot, and I'm not afraid to share that, right? I don't think any of you guys are gonna look at me any differently because I saw a counselor for probably a year and a half. And so yeah, don't be afraid to reach out if you need that. Yes, Tim?
In fact, I would think more of you all becoming the advocate in counselor.
All right. Well, there you go.
I understand how you feel.
Yeah, and so yeah, don't be afraid to reach out. I know we're over time. There's a softball game tonight at 8, so go and support. And I think we have a closing prayer, and then we'll be done.